All right, this video is going to introduce 11 key concepts for understanding the physical environment. It kind of just breaks down different ways to observe and look at the environment and kind of assess to see how accommodating or how useful or how, I guess, annoying. I don't really know the word I'm thinking of. It's just a way to help understand how the physical environment really does impact behavior by introducing 11 different ideas and ways to look at it. So we're going to go through these, and then kind of the bulk of today's online learning is to apply these terms to an environment around you. So I'm also going to attach a PDF of these just because you'll have them in front of you, then you won't have to continue to reference back the video. So you can use that PDF when you're completing the assignment. So all right, here are the first four, and they are in alphabetical order. The first concept is looking at an environment's accessibility. And so accessibility really is discovering the ease of movement that an individual has in their environment. So are you able to walk through your living room without having to step on toys? Are you able to get to your upstairs by walking up the stairs? Are you in a wheelchair so then you're not able to access it? It's just looking at how kind of the flow is and what that looks like. And so accessibility is a huge one, especially with individuals who are wheelchair bound. That's one that often gets brought up when you're thinking about ADA, the American Disabilities Act, making sure that environments are handicap accessible. I think that one often gets referenced there. What is the activity of the environment? So it's the individual's perceived intensity of ongoing behavior within the environment. So if you have a lot of children in your environment, there might be a lot of noise, a lot of running around, a lot of play, a lot of physical activity. If you're in more of an urban setting, there might be a lot more activity with traffic and people and individuals coming and going. If you're in a rural environment, there might be less activity because there's just not as many people and there's more wide open spaces. People's proximity to each other isn't as close. And so maybe you're thinking about the dorms at Kuiper, if there's a lot of people going on and you a lot of people in your suite or in your own, your dorm room, that might be really overwhelming for somebody who doesn't necessarily thrive or enjoy a lot of activity, where somebody else on the opposite end of the spectrum might really gravitate towards more activity and need that in their environment to feel stimulated and alive. So either way is not bad. It's just looking at how intense the behavior is within the environment and also looking at the person's perception of how intense it is. Adaptability, to the extent to which an environment and its components can be reorganized to accommodate new or different patterns of behavior. So a really good example of this would be the classrooms at Kuiper. And so we have the tables have wheels on them. We can make any sort of shape that we want to. We can socially distance the tables. We can bring them together. It can really change to accommodate different types of activities. The chapel is used for weddings. It's used for chapel services. It's used for all different type, lecture, activity type things. And so it's looking at how quickly an environment can change to kind of host or do something new for it. The comfort, so that's the extent to which an environment provides sensory and mobility fit and facilitates task performance. So comfort's kind of one that you think about, cozy. If it's somewhere that you're feeling safe, comfort kind of promotes a feeling of safety. And it's a good fit for your sensory needs. So it's not too overwhelming. It's not too too chaotic. My 13-year-old daughter and I have very different design aesthetics. And so we always laugh about this. She's very minimal. She likes clean lines, neutral colors. And I tend to gravitate towards a little bit more of the pop of color and something crazy and random. And she always laughs when I bring home new house decor because that's not something she would gravitate towards. And so I actually came home. My husband and I were at a wedding, and the 13-year-old was home watching the little kids. And I came home, and her friend had reorganized the entire living room, moved all of this, the couches, everything. And I mean, it was a complete mess because they weren't quite done. And so her desire for a different type of comfort prompted her to just take it upon herself to move the living room around. So I just think it's funny. But that she really wanted to be comfortable in the living room, and she made it happen. All right, control. So the extent to which an environment facilitates personalization and conveys territorial claims to space. And so if you go back to maybe the dorm room, because usually two people are sharing the room, there might be limited control for the individuals living there because they aren't able to have ownership of the whole space. And so they have to like deal with possibly having people's stuff thrown on their side of their room, or they might not like the setup, they might not like the design aesthetic. Thinking about even like a workspace, if you have a cubicle, that feels very different than an office with a door that you can shut. And so control is, if you're thinking about kind of the bigger psychological piece, control, having a sense of control often promotes safety. And so when you're not feeling safe, it's usually because there's some sort of lack of control. And so people often have a desire to have some sort of control or say over the environment. And so when individuals don't, it can lead to like arguments or increased stress or anxiety or depression. So the more control in the environment, usually that tends to promote more safety and ownership of the space. So crowding is looking at like the spatial distribution within an environment. So rural areas tend to be less crowded, urban areas tend to be more crowded. And so if you're growing up in an urban environment, it might be very hard to move to a rural one because you don't have as much access to restaurants or grocery stores, or having just that close proximity of built environments that you're used to, as well as possibly not having close proximity to some of like those relational pieces too, like having neighbors close by, being able to go borrow something, or sending your kids next door to go play. That'd be very different depending on the crowding of your area. So legibility, this tends to be maybe the most unfamiliar one of the 11. Essentially, it means how easy is it to get around your environment. So I naturally think about like street signs. If you think about like usually country roads are often numbered, and so you know that every 8 numbers is a mile. So if you're going from 76 to 84th, there's a mile in between. It's north, south, east, west. It's easy to kind of navigate. So the legibility sometimes of country driving might be a little bit easier, where a more urban or city environment might have one-ways or roundabouts or streets that just go nowhere. I was driving kind of on the northwest side of town just yesterday, and I got so turned around, and I think the person in front of me must have thought I was creepy because I was just like turning thinking I knew where I was going, and I ended up like following for a while, and I followed them down a dead end, and I was like, oh my gosh, I swear I'm not following you. So I quickly turned around and I was like, I'm out of here. I'm sorry about that. So legibility is really important usually for navigating, again, feeling safe in your environment, knowing where you're at, being able to like even read street signs. So is it in your language? Knowing red light, green light, if you're colorblind, like how does that work? So that's essentially what the legibility of an environment is, like kind of knowing how to get around and understanding like the spaces and everything centered around that. Having meaning to your environment, and so extent to which an environment holds individual or cultural meanings for people. And so natural environments also often have a lot of like spiritual meaning to individuals. A house might have like special meaning. It might have negative connotations to an individual too. Meaning isn't always warm and fuzzy. So kind of understanding how environments might be triggering because they might associate it with a certain feeling or vibe and it have some significant meaning to it. All right, and then the final 3 is privacy. That kind of goes along with control a little bit, but privacy, like, are you able to shut the door when you go to the bathroom? Is your environment allowing that? Thinking of like a jail environment, a jail cell often just has a toilet, and so there's no privacy. And so what does that do for an individual's mental well-being? Sensory stimulation is also similar to like activity. Activity kind of encompasses a lot more because it's not focusing just on the senses. So having something with a lot of noise or strobe lights or high-pitched sounds or music blaring might be overwhelming and overstimulating for an individual. If you have an individual who's on the autism spectrum, this one's a very important thing to keep in mind. I was reading an article the other day. It was so sweet how a brother-sister duo, the sister played high school volleyball or middle school, some level of school, and the brother could never go to the game because he had autism, and the cheering and the loud crowds would be too overwhelming for him, and he wasn't able to ever go experience in person. So his parents would always have to come back and just tell him about it. However, for her last home game, both teams agreed that they would spend the first 10 points of the match in silence, that there would be no cheering after points or anything, so he could come into the gym and watch his sister play. And so that sensory stimulation piece was so essential to that environment. And that accommodation, if you think about adaptability, we'll go with that one, because no accommodations on here. I always think that's one. Anyways, that accommodation to the environment reduced the sensory experience, and it allowed for this family to be able to watch a game together. And the sociality is the degree to which an environment facilitates or prevents social interactions among people. And so a library is not necessarily a place you would go to have social activities with a person, perhaps in some capacity, but you're not going to have a wild rager in a library. And so that environment kind of inhibits a social interaction. A church would be one that would really promote sociality. That's a very relational place. And so looking at how those environments promote or prevent social interactions from occurring. So those are kind of a breakdown with some examples that I gave. And so next learning activity will be outlined on the actual Sakai page, but you're going to have to, you'll receive a client situation, and you'll have to find an environment around you and kind of look to see how these 11 concepts would relate to that individual. There'll be more details, but that's kind of how we're going to take just kind of like the textbook learning content and apply it to the real world, because it's something that we're going to want to be aware of when we have clients as well.